This is my kitchen table and also my filing system. Over much of the past 3 decades, I've been an investor. The highest calling of mankind, I've often thought, was private equity. And then I started interviewing.
While I watch your interviews, I know how to do some interviewing.
I've learned in doing my interviews how leaders make it to the top.
I asked him how much he wanted. He said $250. I said, fine. I didn't negotiate with him, and I did no due diligence.
I have something I'd like to sell, and how they stay there. You don't feel inadequate now because being only the second wealthiest man in the world, is that right? One of the most celebrated artists in the world today is Jeff Koons. He's known for his painting, but also particularly well known for his sculptures. Had a chance recently to sit down with Jeff Koons to talk about how he went from being a commodities broker on Wall Street to one of the most celebrated artists in the world. So you were one of the most famous artists in the world today. Did you ever think when you were selling bonds or commodities for Smith Barney that you would be one of the world's most famous artists?
I wanted to participate, so I can't say that I thought, that I would reach as much of a level. I'm very grateful for that. I wanted to be a part of a group of artists, the dialogue of art, how it can affect our lives.
Most artists are probably specialists in paintings or maybe ceramics or maybe in sculptures, but you do all of that, and your works are going for very high prices in all of these areas. So what is it that has enabled you to be a painter that's able to sell works for very high prices, and a sculptor and a ceramicist as well?
I think it's about focusing on what's really kind of relevant to you, to remove fear, to be able to be engaged with the world, to open yourself up to experience. So I think somewhere along the way, David, I was very fortunate and to enjoy the feelings and the sensations that the body and the mind create when you have experience.
How has the art world changed since you entered it a few decades ago as a young artist to today?
I think artists are more isolated. When I came into the New York art world in the mid-'70s, it was smaller. And we had people like Lichtenstein and, Warhol, Johns, Rauschenberg, all of these people that we really looked up to because, these were real artists. They just wanted to participate, make art, but at the same time, they were being able to succeed in representing that fine art artists were participating in culture. I think before this generation, people in America would think of culture of being music, entertainment, but they didn't really think of the fine art artist as really being relevant to culture. I think they changed that. Leo Castelli took Johns and Rauschenberg to meet President Kennedy. Artists were, being invited to the White House. They were being looked at as participants in culture.
So is there any one artist that you would say inspired you to become an artist, or who you most admire now?
I love all art. So many artists I enjoy all through history, from this moment, all the way back to, choosing like a Paleolithic object. But when I was younger, Dali was very important. My parents bought me a coffee table book of Dali's work. It was beautiful with persistent memory on the cover. And eventually, when I'm a teenager, when I was 19, I met Dali. And I called him up. My mother told me she read that he was staying at the St. Regis Hotel half the year. And he picked up the phone and he invited me to come to New York that weekend. And if I would meet him in the lobby at 12 o'clock, right at noon, he would meet with me.
Now, Salvador Dali was famous for different kinds of art, very unusual in many ways, but he also had a very unusual mustache, very thin. And as a young man, did you not have a similar mustache, kind of to copy him?
Well, no, I liked his mustache and I loved to reference it in different artworks.
Now, when you started working in art world, you were more of a painter than a sculptor. Is that fair to say?
I always was a painter.
Always a painter.
In college. I'm making paintings, but my paintings start to become so physical. I start adding little porcelain figures, like these figures around us, small models though, in porcelain to my paintings. They become so big and heavy, I have to take my paintings off the wall. I set this one painting on a table, and I put two inflatables beside it. One was an inflatable elephant, inflatable panda. They were the first inflatables I worked with. But that's when I started to go into sculpture.
Okay, so you're a painter initially, and you're still a painter, but many people, if I mention the name Jeff Koons, they will say he did the dog or the bunny or other animals or other well-known objects. And so when did you come up with the idea of doing these animals and in stainless steel with these very vivid colors?
I always enjoyed Robert Smithson's work, minimalist work, Judd, but I remember seeing Smithson's mirror pieces, and I enjoyed them. And so I decided to buy some, hardware store prefabbed cut mirror, 12 by 12 inch mirrors. And I put two on a wall, like a 45-degree angle off the wall, two on the floor, and I sat in two inflatable flowers, one kind of a little masculine standing upright and one that was round. And then I did one with a rabbit, an inflatable rabbit. And so these pieces, that's when I started to really feel like I was starting to contribute something to the dialogue.
So you're taking an inflatable rabbit, and then do you kind of wrap it in steel?
Well, these were ready-mades. These were just inflatables.
Okay, inflatables.
But I would just set them and let them display themselves. And eventually I go on and I'm making vacuum cleaners, where I'm letting vacuum cleaners just display their newness inside these vitrines. I'm always working with ready-made objects. And even today, the works that we see, even around me, are based in ready-made objects. And the reason I do that, David, is to try to communicate to people that everything is accessible. There should be no judgment. Just be open to everything.
Well, let's take the dogs, for example. Very famous dogs. You have they look like balloon kind of figures to some extent. How do you make those?
In the case of the balloon dog, I blew up a balloon dog. Yes. So I had this balloon, which is kind of like a latex type of piece, molded it, cast it, and then blew that up in scale and put it into a clay, and eventually had that transformed into stainless steel. And then mirrored the stainless steel. If you look at the works around me, these are both sculptures and paintings. This piece of Diana, there were 6,000 3D masks that were used to be able to paint this piece. So when you bring both the 3D and the 2D together, I believe that's art at its most
Let's
powerful.
suppose you're a painter, as you are, and you paint it, you have a canvas and you're painting, and then you're done when you finish. With this kind of, let's say the dog, you gotta blow up the balloon, then you gotta put some material around it, then you gotta do it in stainless steel, then you gotta put a color around it. That's a lot of work. Did you ever say it's too much work for one piece of art?
Well, it is a lot of work, and a lot of time goes by. And I also had to develop a studio of people to work with me to be able to make works like that. To make something like a large balloon dog on your own would be very, very difficult.
Now, one of the pieces that I always like that you've done is the Play-Doh. How many of those did you make?
5.
Now, where did you get the idea for Play-Doh?
My one son was playing with a mound of Play-Doh. I was playing with him, but I was doing something else. And he said, "Dad," and I looked, and he went in front of his mound of Play-Doh, he went, "Voila." And I looked at the mound and his gesture, and I thought, this is what I'm trying to do every day, to make something that you really can't make a judgment about. I mean, it's just perfect in its being. It's fantastic.
You have lots of different types of works of art. Let me mention another type, shrubbery art, where you make a big sculpture, but it's got like shrubbery around it. I've seen some of them.
Topiaries?
Yes.
I made 2. One's called Puppy, and I made that in 1992. And then in 2000, I made one called Split Rocker.
Puppy is now where?
One is in front of the Bilbao Museum in Spain, the Guggenheim. And there's another version of that Hasn't been installed yet, but I believe
Okay.
will be in the United States.
Now, at Glenstone, which is a private museum in Potomac, Maryland, created by Mitch Rails, I think you have something there that's like one of those works of art. Is that right?
Yes, that's called Split Rocker.
Okay.
It's larger than Puppy. Puppy takes about anywhere from 45 to 60,000 plants. And actually, the Split Rocker goes from about 60 to 90, depending on your planning.
You have designed a train, which I thought was once going to be put over the High Line in New York, but now it didn't get there. Where is the train? Have you designed it? And it's gigantic, isn't it? And where will it ultimately go?
Still just a model. It's 166 feet tall. And this train that hangs performs. So it's an old Baldwin train. It's new, but it's a 2900 series engine that we've rebuilt with different steam generators and different ways of creating all the optics of the wheels turning and everything. And what takes place at least one time a day, the train would start up. And everything that a real train would do leaving the station, this train hanging from the crane will do. So very slowly, it's like ding, 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 and then and the train's a breathing machine, just like we are. So people can relate to that.
So are you going to build it?
I hope it gets built. And I've been in dialogue with Qatar. They've shown interest. So I hope that it gets built. And that's something that for my own legacy, I hope that within my interest in public sculpture gets made.
Let's talk about your beginning and how you became an artist. So many artists are born in famous cities known for art: Paris, Rome, London, New York. Were you born in any of those famous cities known for creating great artists?
No, I was born in York, Pennsylvania, but Pennsylvania is known for some great artists. Warhol has come from Pittsburgh, Keith Haring, Kutztown, Andrew Wyeth. Many artists have come from Pittsburgh, the Calder family.
Where did you get the inspiration to be an artist from?
I learned aesthetics through my dad. When he was younger, he worked in a furniture store, and he went off to World War II. And when he came back, he went back to this interior decorating store where he worked as a child, and he became an interior decorator. And my dad was great. I mean, he really developed, he had a very aesthetic way of looking at things.
And your mother, was she interested in the art world?
My mother went to college, so I think a desire for developing my intellect, I think I could attribute to my mother.
How did you do in high school? Were you an artist in high school?
I was always in the art class.
You go to Baltimore for the Maryland Institute of Arts, and you later transfer to the Art Institute School in Chicago. Why did you move from Baltimore to Chicago?
I was a very ambitious artist in school, and my artworks were being shown in the president's office at Maryland Institute College of Art. But I came to New York and I saw the Jim Nutt show at the Whitney. And this was in 1974. And I decided that this was the type of artwork that I could relate to. And Jim Nutt's work was about personal iconography, but it was still very tied to pop art and to art history. And I was attracted to that because I loved Dada and Surrealism. And Chicago was really the hub for this type of work. They were called the Chicago Imagists.
So you graduate, you have a diploma. Where do you go next?
I applied to graduate school, but I was not accepted. And I decided just to stay in Chicago. And I was working at like Carson Perry Scott at one of the department stores doing display work. And I heard Patti Smith's album, Horses. And when I heard that album and the DJ on the radio in Chicago was talking about a scene in New York of young artists and poets and everybody hanging out in this scene. I got up and I hitchhiked to New York the next day. And I've been here really ever since then.
So you moved to New York, and when you're in New York, are you doing artwork or are you getting other things done to pay the rent?
Well, I'm trying to make artwork, but I also have to support myself. I went to Museum of Modern Art and I applied for this type of job to move artworks. They said, look, Jeff, you're calling every day. We don't have a preparator's job, but if you'll work in the membership development department, there's an opening in the ticket booth, selling tickets. And you just, would you work in the ticket booth? I said, absolutely. And that's how I started at MOMA. And then during breaks, I would start to promote their membership.
But how did you wind up selling commodities at Smith Barney? Because you did that for a while too, right?
People would come up to me and they would, take out a membership and they'd say, Jeff, why don't you come and work for me? So I ended up thinking that for the type of works that I wanted to make, I really had to raise my income. So I left the museum and I went into becoming registered. I started off selling mutual funds. I would go door to door, basically. I mean, I would call and make appointments. Then eventually I became registered for commodities. And, being a broker, it's a salesperson. I mean, I was trying to bring in people. I wasn't an analyst, but I was a registered broker.
So when you're doing this, you're selling commodities and, you're trying to convince people to buy, open accounts and so forth. Did you ever think, I'm really going to be a famous artist someday?
I can't say I was thinking about being famous. I wanted to participate. I wanted to give it everything I had. I always would think about leading to the best of my ability, and I would say yes to everything. If somebody had asked me to be in an exhibition, I would tell them yes, and I would try to participate, make the best work that I could. I was ambitious. I had tremendous respect for artists like Warhol and Lichtenstein, but my ambition wasn't the fame. It was to be part of a group. The power of art, the transcending power of becoming a person. I wanted to become the person I could become.
When did you say, okay, I'm good enough as an artist to sell some art and I don't need to sell commodities anymore?
I reached a point where I couldn't think about anything other than my work. So I, should be trying to, open some more accounts, be able to give more service to people. But instead, I'd be on the phone talking to Dr. Richard P. Feynman and talking about equilibrium. How can I get permanent equilibrium? Can I do it really within the confines of an aquarium? And I couldn't think about anything else. And so I was accepting, all the ramifications that if I made a show and it wasn't successful, that, maybe I have to go pump gas. I have to start all over. But I didn't have any options.
Richard Feynman, for those who don't know, is one of the most famous physicists of the 20th century, Nobel Prize winner, among other things. How did you get him on the phone?
I called him. And so I was in an airplane flying back, I think, from Los Angeles, and I saw that he had just released the book, Surely You're Joking, Dr. Feynman. And I thought, oh my gosh, I was reading that he loves to play bongos and he likes art, he paints. So after, a day when I landed, I called up Feynman and I told him the work that I wanted to create. I wanted to create these equilibrium tanks, but I was worried that I didn't know how to create permanent equilibrium in such a confined space. And he told me I could do it.
So are you looking for new things that you haven't conquered yet?
I've always loved philosophy. And I think one of the reasons I work with a reflective surface is because in philosophy, the word you notice the most is to reflect and reflection. I want to continue to reflect. I want to continue to become. The art happens inside us. These objects aren't art. They're just paintings. They're just forms. But art is really the essence that we can feel as people of our own potential.
So if somebody's watching and says, I want to be the next Jeff Koons, what advice would you give to that person?
I would tell them to trust in themselves. After you trust in yourself, you want to go outside yourself. And if you really focus on your interests, it connects you to a universal vocabulary.
So what is it that you think makes an artist who goes from being a not well-known, maybe struggling artist to being a famous artist?
I think my family gave me a lot of support, emotional support when I was younger. I can't say that I was a loner growing up, but I was thinking philosophically and my mind was wondering about what the possibilities I could find in life. But to be able to be part of a group was really meaningful to me, and the art world represented that.
So if somebody's watching and says, I want to be the next Jeff Koons, I want to be a famous artist, what advice would you give to that person?
I would tell them to trust in themselves and to focus on your interests. And what I found in my own life, that when I really focus on my interests, and there was a certain point where I learned how to trust in myself. After you trust in yourself, you want to go outside yourself. And if you really focus on your interests, it connects you to a universal vocabulary.
Now, did your parents live to see your success as a famous artist?
They did. And I'm very grateful that they were able to see that the type of support that they gave to me, to be able to believe in myself. They brought me up also to be self-reliant, that I was able to at least accomplish part of my dreams that they saw.
So the new worlds you want to conquer are just continuing to find new ways to express yourself in art, and sounds like you're a very happy person.
I want to be, a greater person. I want to be the best person I can be. I want to be the best artist I can be. The role models for me, artists like Titian and Picasso, Matisse, these artists got better and better the older they got. I mean, late Titian, it's
true.
Incredible.
Not that you're going anywhere anytime soon, but what would you like your legacy to be?
David, I would hope that I could be somewhat of a role model, that if I've been able to accomplish what I have been able to, that anybody feels like they can do it too. That if they have the interest, that they would really like to participate, be involved in the dialogue of art. Art's so amazing. I mean, I was this kid from Pennsylvania who went to art school, but art connects you to all the human disciplines. Art is not this hierarchy. The whole idea of a hierarchy that you need to be informed about something, it doesn't exist. People do that for their own kind of empowerment to disempower you, the viewer. You don't need anything in art other than your own past experience to that moment. And I hope that I'm a symbol of that.